Good evening, everyone. As Eve has said, I am Jonny. I'm on staff here at St George's and have been since February, so a little while. And I'm the creative lead, which means that I look after all things kind of graphic design, social media, website, that kind of vibe. I basically get all the fun jobs. Everyone else does like serious vicar type things, and I just make pretty stuff in Photoshop. It's great. So normally I come to the morning service with my wife Eliza, but it's great to be here sharing with you this evening. And we're kicking off this series on faithful friendships. As Eve said, we're going to be looking at this over, I'm guessing 6 weeks, but over the summer, and looking at friendships in the Bible and kind of dissecting them a little bit and seeing what we can learn from them. And tonight we're going to be in the book of Daniel. So if you have grabbed a Bible, you can turn to Daniel chapter 1. It's kind of roughly in the middle-ish, hopefully. And we're going to look at that in a minute, but you can turn to get it ready. You've probably heard of Daniel. He's famous for Sunday school stories like The Lion's Den and The Fiery Furnace are some of his big hits. But tonight we're going to be looking at the very start of the book and kind of some of the context of those stories which follow later. And we're going to explore how Daniel lives out his life in a foreign land, and yet he remains faithful to God with the help of his friends. Something to know about me is that I love being at home. I'm a massive hermit. There's nothing I like more than a cozy weekend. I might have a little lie-in, I make some coffee, I've got my home espresso situation going on, and then maybe read a book, just chill, check on the plants, see if they need watering, pottering around, that kind of thing. And if I have to go away, I get a little bit anxious about it. I get a bit kind of nervous about being away, and I worry that I won't have everything that I need with me, so I end up overpacking, taking way too much stuff, and end up with loads of things that I really don't need, but just in case, it's a problem. You might not be as big of a hermit as I am. Maybe you are, but maybe not. But there is something, I think, in all of us on a kind of deeper level that longs for the safety and the security of home. And the context of the passage we're looking at is actually the same context as in the Ezekiel series, which we've just finished. Jerusalem is seized by the king of Babylon, which was the kind of, Babylon was like the global kind of superpower of the time, the kind of empire. And Daniel and his friends are captured and they're carted off to Babylon. And that's the place that Ezekiel wrote his book from. Now, Jerusalem, where they've left, was important because that's where the temple was. It was the center of the Jewish world, and so much of the Israelites' faith revolved around the kind of rhythms and the practices of the temple. And so now that they've been taken away from that, it all goes out of the window. But we're going to see how Daniel and his friends managed to follow and be faithful to God despite being far away from home and in this alien environment that has no respect for their God. So let's look together at Daniel chapter 1, starting at verse 1, and I think it should be on the screens too. We're going to kind of work through it together, and I'm going to jump in with a few bits as well. Verse 1, in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the particles from the temple of God. These he carried off to the temple of his God in Babylonia and put in the treasure house of his God. Then the king, that's the king of Babylon, ordered Ashpenaz, chief of his court officials, to bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility, young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and the literature of the Babylonians. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after that they were to enter the king's service. So the Babylonians were experts in colonialism. They had this whole strategy where they would invade and conquer a people group, and then they would rule over them, but they would also take some of the kind of premium, top-tier citizens to Babylon and indoctrinate them into Babylonian culture. And they would teach them their language and religion and all about Babylon and why it's this amazing empire. The idea being to brainwash them into almost kind of becoming Babylonians, stripping away their culture and their faith and religion and their sense of identity. And then sometimes they would be sent back to their homeland to advocate the culture of Babylon to the citizens that were left behind. So it's this kind of clever way of controlling the people across the empire and holding on to power. Let's carry on. Verse 6. Among those who were chosen were some from Judah: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The chief official gave them new names. To Daniel, the name Belteshazzar; to Hananiah, Shadrach; to Mishael, Meshach; and to Azariah, Abednego. There are some difficult names, so please be patient. Thank you. In biblical times, names were really important, and they carried deep significance and sometimes even spoke prophetically over people's lives. For example, Abraham in Hebrew meaning father of many, or Jesus, the Lord saves. Here we see the Israelite lads having their Jewish names removed and replaced by Babylonian names. Daniel in Hebrew meant God is my judge. Hananiah, the Lord is gracious. Mishael, who is like God. And Azariah, the Lord has helped. And then in contrast, their new Babylonian names come from Babylonian gods, which they are named after. And so it's shifting this focus away from their God, where they've come from, to change them and to redefine their identity. Carrying on in verse 8. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself this way. Now God had caused the official to show favor and compassion to Daniel. But the official told Daniel, I am afraid of the Lord, the king, who has assigned your food and drink. Why should he see you looking worse than the other young men your age? The king would then have my head because of you. Daniel then said to the guard, whom the chief official had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearances with that of the young men who eat the royal food, and treat your servants in accordance with what you see. So he agreed to this and tested them for 10 days. And so we see Daniel and his friends, to shorten it, I won't say the names every time, start to stand their ground a little bit. They start to kind of kick back. And we're not told explicitly why they don't eat the food, but presumably it didn't align with the kind of Jewish kosher food rules, or perhaps it might have been dedicated to Babylonian gods. We don't quite know, but it's clear that eating the food would have been disobeying the Jewish law and the kind of food laws, and would be a way of being unfaithful to their God. Verse 15. At the end of the 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food. So the guard took away their choice food and the wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables instead. To these 4 young men, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning, and Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. At the end of the time set by the king to bring them into his service, the chief official presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and he found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's service. In every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than the magicians and enchanters in his whole kingdom. And Daniel remained there until the first year of King Cyrus. This is the word of the Lord. In many ways, we too are living in Babylon today. Obviously not in a kind of physical sense, but in a spiritual way and kind of under the surface, our society has a lot of echoes of Babylon. We live in what people call a post-Christian culture, where generally people don't share our faith and are maybe skeptical or even suspicious of it. Security is often found in money and career and comfort or status. We constantly consume more and more, whether it's food or Netflix or Reels, and faith is pushed into the private life. It's tolerated behind doors. You do you, but don't put it onto me, that kind of thing. And while I'm not saying that we should try and go back to some super Christian culture, that definitely has a lot of complications with it. I'm just trying to acknowledge it, that there are some challenges and resistance to living out our faith today. But as we've seen, Daniel didn't face Babylon on his own, and neither do we. God strategically placed people around him to support his faith in exile. Together, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah gently resist being assimilated to become like the Babylonians. They don't straight away go in all guns blazing and say, no, we're not having any of it. They are respectful of the culture that they're in, but they draw a line when it comes to the food that they eat, as it would be unfaithful to their God and go against their faith. They also help one another to remember where they've come from and to remember their God-given identity. And if we were to read on further in the book of Daniel, we'd see more of these kind of stories, and one where they're praying together and they're supporting one another to follow the kind of rhythms and practices that they would have done in the temple in Jerusalem, but in Babylon, which ends up getting them into lots of trouble. So they encourage and they support one another even when things are difficult. So what can this passage teach us about faithful friendships? I've been told that all good sermons have 3 points to them, so here we go. Firstly, friendships form us. There's an old saying that goes, show me your friends and I'll show you your future. It's super cringe, and really cheesy, but there is some truth to that. We end up becoming more like the people that we spend our time with. And so instead of asking, are my friends fun to be around? Are they really cool? Or whatever it might be, we can ask ourselves, are my friends making me more into the kind of person that God wants me to be? I don't think that means that we should become super cliquey and not speak to anyone outside of church and just have Christian friends, but I think it is something that we should bear in mind. Secondly, friendships remind us of who we are. As we saw in Babylon, the 4 friends were renamed, and the Babylonians tried to reshape their identity and their idea of who they were. And yet, they would remember where they'd come from and what their identity was, and could remind each other when they needed it. And in the same way, when we're struggling, when we're feeling maybe insecure or kind of putting our value in things that perhaps we shouldn't, our friends can remind us of who we are, that our identity is in Christ. And thirdly, friendships are not always chosen. Daniel didn't choose his friends in Babylon. They were in the same place at the same time. I don't think he went around the Babylonian courts kind of seeing what hobbies do we have in common, like can we get along, can we be mates? And in the same way, often friendships just happen and they kind of end up just being the people that we are around. And as I've been prepping the talk and kind of reflecting this week, I found myself asking that question of who are those people in my life for me? Who are those friends? And I think for me, it is my small group. We meet each week to chat for a bit, we share pudding, and then we talk about the Bible, and it's great. But if I'm being really honest, those probably aren't the people that I would have chosen. We're all completely different, with different ages, different hobbies, different interests, different personalities. But those are the people that God's put me alongside to do life with. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about the church, is that often our friends and the people that we are alongside look different to us. I've got a really simple response this evening, and it is just that question. Who are those people in your life that God has placed alongside you? Do you have people that you can share deep conversations with, that you can open up with and be honest and vulnerable and can support one another in your walk with Jesus? I think this can look different for each of us, and I'm sure this will come out more over the series, over the summer. We all need people in our lives that we can walk together with. We've talked about the similarities of Babylon and our culture today, but there is one big contrast, one difference. The Israelites, Daniel and friends, were away from the temple, which was their place of worship. And thankfully, we're not restricted to worshipping in one place anymore, and we are lucky to live in a country where we can gather each week to worship Jesus together in church and in small groups. And that is a great way to find and cultivate these kind of friendships. So we're going to spend a few moments in quiet, just prayerfully reflecting on that question. And yeah, I'd love you to just think about who those people are in your life, and perhaps one thing that you could do this week to be more intentional with those relationships.